The Florida sun was setting over Palmetto Springs, painting the manicured lawns in shades of gold and amber, when Frank Falk's phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. "They're in our house. Please come home, now." Frank's heart stopped. Sarah never texted in all caps. Never. He was 3 blocks away, returning from the hardware store with paint samples, the exact shade of desert sand, mandated by the HOA for all exterior trim. He'd been trying to comply, trying to keep the peace, trying to enjoy the retirement he'd earned after 23 years with the U.S. Marshals Service. He pressed the accelerator. When he pulled into his driveway at 1247 Oleander Court, his home looked normal from the outside. The same cream-colored stucco, the same terracotta roof tiles, the same neatly trimmed hibiscus bushes. But the front door stood open, and through it he could hear voices, aggressive, commanding, wrong. Frank moved with practiced silence up his own walkway. His training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, protect civilians, maintain tactical advantage. But these weren't fugitives or criminals he was approaching. This was supposed to be his sanctuary. He stepped inside and froze. His living room looked like a crime scene. The couch cushions had been thrown across the floor. Picture frames lay shattered. His wife's antique escritoire, inherited from her grandmother, had been pried open, its delicate drawers dumped in a heap, books scattered everywhere. Cabinet doors hung open, their contents ransacked. And in the center of it all stood Sarah, his wife of 18 years, trembling with barely contained rage. Her left shoulder bore an angry red mark, visible even through her blouse. Tears streaked her face, but her eyes blazed with fury. 3 people occupied his violated home. 2 men in dark, tactical style, uniforms with patches reading "Show Enforcement," flanked a woman. Frank recognized immediately Karen Gregory, president of the Palmetto Springs Homeowners Association. Karen held a clipboard like a weapon. She was a sharp-featured woman in her mid-50s, with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a navy blazer with an oversized HOA badge pinned to the lapel, a gold-plated monstrosity she'd clearly designed herself. "Mr. Falk," Karen said, her voice dripping with false courtesy, "we've completed our compliance inspection. You'll be receiving formal citations for—" "Get out of my house." Frank's voice was quiet, controlled, deadly calm. Karen's smile didn't waver. The HOA bylaws clearly state that compliance officers may conduct inspections when violations are suspected. "Get out of my house." Something in Frank's tone finally registered. The 2 uniformed men exchanged glances. One of them, a thick-necked man with a shaved head, shifted his weight nervously. "You don't give me orders," Karen snapped, her composure cracking. "I am the HOA president, and you are in violation of 17 separate regulations. These men are deputized enforcement officers with full authority." "They're not deputized by anyone who matters," Frank said. "And you've just committed multiple felonies: breaking and entering, destruction of property, assault." His eyes moved to Sarah's shoulder. "You put your hands on my wife." She refused to comply with a lawful inspection. The bald officer interjected. Frank's gaze shifted to him. 23 years of staring, down dangerous. Men had honed that look into something that could strip paint. The officer took a step back. "You have 30 seconds to leave my property," Frank said. "Starting now." Karen's face flushed red. "You'll be hearing from our attorney. You'll be fined. You'll be foreclosed upon. You'll be—" 20 seconds. The officers were already moving toward the door. Karen sputtered, her authority crumbling, but she followed them out, her heels clicking aggressively against the tile floor. "This isn't over, Falk," she shouted from the driveway. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Frank closed the door and immediately turned to Sarah. "Are you hurt?" "Did they—" "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked. "I'm fine, but Frank, they just walked in. I told them no. I told them they needed a warrant. And that woman—" She nodded, "and that bald one just shoved past me. My shoulder hit the doorframe." She gestured at the destruction around them. "They tore through everything. Our bedroom, your office, even the guest room. They took photos of everything. They were looking through our financial documents, our mail, everything." Frank pulled her close, his mind already working through protocols, laws, jurisdictions. "Did you call the police?" "I tried. They said it was a civil HOA matter and we should contact our attorney." Frank's jaw tightened. That would change, but first documentation. He spent the next hour photographing everything, every overturned drawer, every broken frame, every violation of his home. He photographed Sarah's shoulder, now purpling into a bruise. He documented the pry marks on the escritoire. He collected everything with the methodical precision precision of a man who'd spent 2 decades building federal cases. Sarah watched him work. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," Frank said simply. "I'm not." Frank had moved to Palmetto Springs 6 months ago with one goal: peace. After spending more than 2 decades pursuing the most dangerous fugitives in America, he'd wanted a quiet neighborhood, a simple life, a place where the biggest drama was whose rose bushes were blooming best. Palmetto Springs had seemed perfect, a gated community of 200 homes, each one a pristine example of Florida residential architecture. Clubhouse with a pool, tennis courts, perfectly maintained common areas with fountains and walking paths. The HOA fees were steep at $450 per month, but the community was beautiful. What Frank hadn't understood, what the real estate agent had conveniently glossed over, was that Palmetto Springs wasn't governed by an HOA. It was ruled by one. Karen Gregory had been elected HOA president 3 years ago on a platform of maintaining property values. She'd won by 17 votes in a community where fewer than 50 people typically bothered to vote in HOA elections. Once in power, she'd transformed the role into something between a dictatorship and a protection racket. The warning signs had been there from the beginning, but Frank had ignored them. He'd been so focused on unpacking, on helping Sarah settle in, on finally relaxing, that he dismissed the whispers. He remembered now, his second week in Palmetto Springs. An elderly man named Harold Chen had stopped him during a morning walk. Mr. Chen lived 4 houses down, a retired engineer with kind eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Mr. Chen had said. "I hope you enjoy it here, but a word of advice? Keep your head down. Follow every rule exactly. Don't give them any reason." "Them?" Frank had asked. "The HOA, Mrs. Gregory." Mr. Chen's voice had dropped to a whisper. "She's different than most. She takes things very seriously. Too seriously." Frank had thanked him and forgotten about it. Now he wondered what Mr. Chen had endured. Over the next week, as Frank began asking questions, the truth emerged like a body floating to the surface. The Hendersons at 1189 Oleander had been fined. $15,000 for a garden gnome. Not for having a garden gnome. Those were permitted under Section 7.3.2 of the HOA bylaws. They'd been fined because their gnome was 11 inches tall, and the bylaws specified a maximum of 10 inches. When they'd protested that no reasonable person could eyeball a 1-inch difference, Karen had brought measuring equipment to prove the violation. When they'd refused to pay, she'd placed a lien on their house. The Patels at 1156 had a 13-year-old son who loved basketball. They'd installed a regulation hoop in their driveway. Within a day, they'd received a citation. Portable basketball equipment was prohibited on weekdays between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The boy could only practice on weekends or after dark. When the father protested that this was unreasonable, the boy had school during the week and homework in the evenings. Karen had responded by citing them for the hoop being visible from the street, for noise violations when the boy practiced on weekends, and for their garage door being left open more than 15 minutes during ball retrieval. The fines had totaled $8,000. Mr. Patel had suffered a stress-induced heart attack. Mrs. Henderson, a widow in her 70s, had planted roses along her fence line. Beautiful roses, the kind that would win prizes at garden shows. Karen had cited her for unauthorized landscaping modifications. The roses, Karen claimed, exceeded the permitted height for border plantings by 3 inches. Mrs. Henderson had kept meticulous records and recordings of her interactions with Karen. She'd saved everything. The list went on. Mailboxes 2 inches off standard, cars parked at incorrect angles, holiday decorations up 1 day past the permitted date, trash cans visible from the street at 6:47 a.m. On collection day, pickup didn't begin until 7 a.m., but the cans had to be invisible until then. Every violation came with fines, and Karen had created her enforcement army. The HOA enforcement officers were unlicensed security guards, friends and associates of Karen's, given official-looking uniforms and told they had authority. They patrolled the neighborhood in golf carts fitted with flashing amber lights. They took photos. They wrote citations. They intimidated. And apparently they conducted raids. Frank compiled it all. He interviewed 14 neighbors, all of whom spoke only after he assured them he had a plan. fan. They'd been terrorized into silence. Several had considered moving but couldn't afford to sell with HOA liens on their properties. One name kept appearing in every story: Michael Torres, Karen's attorney, a sleazy personal injury lawyer who'd found a lucrative side business in HOA enforcement. He filed the liens, sent the threatening letters, and represented the HOA in the few cases that made it to court. Judges typically sided with HOAs. In Florida, it was a homeowner's responsibility to read the bylaws before buying. But Karen and Torres had crossed a line, multiple lines. Frank made careful notes. Then he made phone calls. On Monday morning, Frank drove to the federal building in downtown Tampa. He hadn't been there since his retirement party 4 months ago. The security guards recognized him immediately. "Marshal Falk, good to see you, sir. What brings you in?" "I need to speak with Assistant U.S. Attorney Rodriguez," Frank said. "Is she available?" Carmen Rodriguez had been Frank's primary AUSA for the last 8 years of his career. She'd prosecuted every major case he'd brought her: fugitive apprehensions that turned into RICO charges, interstate flight cases that uncovered larger conspiracies, bond jumpers who led them to drug trafficking operations. They'd worked together so long they could finish each other's sentences. She looked up from her desk when Frank walked in, surprise and pleasure crossing her face. "Frank, I thought you were retired and fishing or golfing or whatever it is you old guys do." "I thought so too," Frank said. "Then my HOA president committed multiple federal crimes against me and my neighbors." Carmen's expression sharpened. "Sit down and talk." Frank laid it out. Every detail, every victim, every violation. He spread photographs across her desk. Sarah's bruised shoulder, the destroyed interior of his home, Mr. Patel's medical records, Mrs. Henderson's recordings, the fraudulent fines, the fake enforcement officers. She created a private police force, Frank said. Unlicensed individuals conducting searches, making threats, committing assaults. She's extorted tens of thousands of dollars from residents. She's placed fraudulent liens on properties. And 3 days ago, her people forcibly entered my home without consent, assaulted my wife, and conducted an illegal search. Carmen listened, her lawyer's mind already categorizing charges: home invasion, assault, extortion, wire fraud, if any. Of the payments were electronic. Color of law violations, claiming authority they don't possess. Conspiracy. She looked up. "Frank, this is a federal case. An easy one, I know. Why come to me instead of just arresting her yourself?" Frank smiled grimly. "Because I'm retired, and I want this done right. No defense attorney is going to claim I went rogue on a personal vendetta. I want her to face the full weight of the federal government, by the book, airtight. You want her to understand she picked the wrong victim?" "Yes," Carmen nodded. "Let me make some calls." By Wednesday, the investigation was official. FBI agents conducted interviews. Federal prosecutors reviewed evidence. The assistant U.S. attorney coordinated with the Florida Attorney General's office on potential state charges. Karen Gregory had no idea what was coming, but Frank knew she'd escalate first. People like Karen always did when challenged. They doubled down. They couldn't help themselves. He was right. On Thursday afternoon, Frank received a certified letter. The HOA was filing foreclosure proceedings on his property for E.B. Montatam. Accumulated violations totaling $47,500 in unpaid fines. The violations included improper paint color, still waiting on approval for the exact shade. Trash cans visible during restricted hours. He'd been hospitalized during collection day, and Sarah had forgotten to retrieve them. Unauthorized vehicle in driveway. His nephew had visited in a commercial van, and refusal to comply with lawful HOA inspection. The letter gave him 14 days to pay or vacate. Sarah read it with shaking hands. "They can't do this. This is our home." "They can't," Frank agreed, "and they won't." He called Carmen. She just accelerated her own arrest. "Fraud in progress," Carmen said. "Even better. How do you want to play this?" Frank thought about it. He could wait for the FBI to make arrests quietly at Karen's home. Standard operating procedure. Clean, professional, effective. But the neighbors deserved to see it. They deserved to know they were safe. They deserved to see justice happen in front of them, to witness the moment when the tyrant fell. "The monthly HOA meeting is in 9 days, Frank said. "She always holds court there. Every resident is required to attend or face fines." Carmen's smile was audible through the phone. "You want a public arrest?" "I want everyone to see that the law applies to everyone, even petty dictators skaters in gated communities. I'll coordinate with the FBI. This is going to be very satisfying. The 9 days before the HOA meeting felt like the calm before a hurricane. Frank continued his normal routine. Morning walks, hardware store trips, grocery shopping. He smiled at neighbors. He waved to Karen when he saw her patrolling in her golf cart. She stared back with undisguised hatred. The citations continued. His lawn was 1/4 inch too long. His car was parked 17 degrees off center. His porch light was the wrong color. Temperature 3000 K instead of the mandated 2700 K warm white. Each citation came with a $500 fine. Frank saved them all. Meanwhile, the federal investigation progressed. FBI agents interviewed more residents, many of whom had been too afraid to speak before. The scope of Karen's operation became clear. Over $300,000 in fraudulent fines collected over 3 years. Dozens of assaults and illegal searches. Systematic intimidation. Michael Torres, her attorney, was complicit in every step. He'd drafted the fake legal documents, sent threatening letters on law firm letterhead, and collected a percentage of every fine. Carmen built the case methodically. Wire fraud for electronic payments, mail fraud for the threatening letters, civil rights violations, under color of law, conspiracy, assault, extortion, breaking and entering. The charges accumulated like snow in a blizzard. We have enough to put her away for 15 years, Carmen told Frank. Torres is looking at 10. What about the enforcement officers? The 2 who entered your house are facing assault and burglary charges. The others are cooperating in exchange for reduced charges. They're ready to testify that Karen ordered them to intimidate residents, conduct searches and make threats. Frank nodded. And the meeting? Coordinated with FBI. 6 agents, plain clothes, positioned around the room. We'll let her dig herself in deeper, then make the arrests. I'll be there personally. The night before the meeting, Frank couldn't sleep. Sarah found him at 2 a.m., sitting in the living room they'd carefully restored. You're thinking about her, Sarah said. I'm thinking about what she represents, Frank corrected. Small-time tyrants exist everywhere. HOAs, businesses, bureaucracies. People who get a tiny bit of power and become monsters. Most of them never face consequences because their victims are too afraid or too exhausted to fight back. But you're not. No, I'm not. He looked at his wife. After tomorrow, this neighborhood gets to heal. And Karen Gregory learns that some people can't be bullied. Frank smiled. That too. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the Palmetto Springs Clubhouse. By 6:45, every seat was filled. Residents who'd never attended before came out of curiosity, obligation, or hope. Word had spread. Something was happening. No one knew exactly what, but everyone sensed change in the air. Karen sat at the head table on a raised platform, Michael Torres beside her, several binders stacked in front of them. Her 2 primary enforcement officers flanked the entrances. She looked regal, untouchable, supreme. Frank and Sarah arrived at 6:55 and took seats in the middle section. Frank noted the FBI agents positioned around the room, 2 near the exits, 1 by the windows, 3 scattered among the residents. Carmen Rodriguez sat in the back row, dressed casually, a laptop bag beside her. Karen called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. Welcome, residents of Palmetto Springs, she began, her voice echoing through the microphone. We have significant business tonight. Several properties face foreclosure for unpaid violations. Several residents face suspension of community privileges, and we need to discuss increased enforcement measures. A murmur ran through the crowd. Increased enforcement? First order of business, Karen continued, her eyes finding Frank. The Falk property at 1247 Oleander Court. Total violations, 47,500. Refusal to comply with lawful inspection. Refusal to pay legally imposed fines. Assault on an HOA officer during the performance of his duties. That's a lie, Sarah said loudly. Karen's smile was venomous. Mrs. Falk, you're out of order. Outbursts result in a $200 fine. No, Frank said, standing. His voice carried through the room without shouting. shouting. No more fines, no more lies, no more tyranny. Karen's face flushed. Mr. Falk, sit down immediately, or what? You'll send your fake police to assault my wife again? You'll ransack my home again? You'll file more fraudulent liens? Torres stood. Mr. Falk, you're making serious accusations that could constitute slander. They're not accusations, Frank said. They're documented facts. Your client committed multiple felonies. So did you. And tonight, you're both going to face the consequences. Karen's hand moved toward her phone, probably to call her officers. Frank held up his hand. Before you do that, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Frank Falk. I'm a retired Deputy U.S. Marshal. I spent 23 years apprehending federal fugitives, building RICO cases, and working with federal prosecutors. And for the past 2 weeks, I've been building a federal case against you. The room went silent. Karen's face drained of color. You've extorted money from residents, Frank continued. You've assaulted people. You've conducted illegal searches. You've filed fraudulent legal documents. You've impersonated law enforcement. You've created a criminal enterprise disguised as an HOA. This is ridiculous, Karen sputtered. You have no authority. I don't, Frank agreed. But she does. Carmen Rodriguez stood, holding up her credentials. Assistant U.S. Attorney Carmen Rodriguez. Mrs. Gregory. Mr. Torres, you're both under federal investigation for wire fraud, mail fraud, extortion, conspiracy, civil rights violations under color of law, and assault. The FBI agents moved to the exits, blocking them. Two positioned themselves behind Karen and Torres. Karen's composure finally shattered. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I have authority. These people agreed to the bylaws when they moved here. You have no authority to commit crimes, Carmen said. And the bylaws don't grant you immunity from federal law. Every fine was legal. Every inspection was permitted under the governing documents. Frank stepped into the aisle. Mrs. Henderson, would you share your recordings? The elderly woman stood, trembling but determined. She held up her phone. I recorded every interaction with Mrs. Gregory, including the one where she threatened to have me removed from the community by any means necessary if I didn't pay $8,000 for roses that were 3 inches too tall. Mr. Patel, Frank said. Your medical records. Mr. Patel stood. Stress-induced cardiac event. My cardiologist directly attributed it to the systematic harassment from the HOA. I have his written statement. One by one, residents stood. Each one shared their story. The room filled with testimonies of abuse, intimidation, and extortion. Karen tried to maintain control. These people are lying. They're conspiring against me. They've always been jealous of my leadership. Karen Gregory, Carmen said formally. Michael Torres. You're both under arrest. The FBI agents moved in. Handcuffs clicked into place. You can't arrest me, Karen screamed. I'm the president. I have rights. I'll sue all of you. I'll destroy this entire neighborhood. Ma'am, one of the agents said quietly, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. As they led Karen and Torres out of the clubhouse, the residents sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Mrs. Henderson, then Mr. Patel, then the Chens. Soon the entire room erupted in applause. Frank didn't join them. He watched Karen being loaded into the federal vehicle, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. Sarah took his hand. It's over, almost, Frank said. The federal trial took 4 months. Karen Gregory and Michael Torres both pled not guilty, confident that their interpretation of HOA bylaws would protect them. It didn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed over $300,000 in collected fines, most of which had gone into Karen's personal accounts and Torres's law firm. Testimony from the enforcement officers revealed a pattern of illegal searches, assaults, and intimidation, all ordered directly by Karen. Recordings, photographs, medical records, and expert testimony painted a picture of systematic abuse. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was scathing. Mrs. Gregory, you perverted a position of community trust into a criminal enterprise. You terrorized your neighbors, assaulted innocent people, and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. You created a climate of fear in what should have been a peaceful community. This court finds your actions particularly egregious because you targeted vulnerable vulnerable people, the elderly, families with children, those who couldn't afford to fight back. Karen Gregory received 8 years in federal prison and restitution of $347,000 to her victims. Michael Torres received 6 years and disbarment. The enforcement officers received suspended sentences in exchange for their testimony, plus community service and restraining orders, preventing them from working in any HOA capacity. 6 months after Karen's arrest, Palmetto Springs held new HOA elections. 73% of residents voted, a record. They elected a new board with clear guidelines, transparency, reasonable enforcement, and respect for homeowners. The fraudulent fines were voided. The liens were lifted. The bylaws were revised to prevent future abuse. Mr. Chen planted a beautiful garden visible from the street. The Patel boys' basketball hoops stayed up, and neighborhood kids joined. Him for evening games. Mrs. Henderson's roses won a county garden award. Frank and Sarah hosted a neighborhood barbecue. 50 people came. They ate, laughed, and shared stories of their new freedom. Late in the evening, after most guests had left, Mr. Chen approached Frank. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being brave when the rest of us were too afraid." "I had advantages you didn't," Frank said. "Training, resources, knowledge of the system. It would have been wrong not to use them." "Still," Mr. Chen said, "you could have just moved, sold the house and left us behind." Frank shook his head. "This is my home, our home, worth fighting for." Sarah joined them, sliding her arm around Frank's waist. "Have you thought about what you'll do now? Real retirement?" Frank looked around at his neighborhood, at the kids playing basketball under the streetlights, at couples walking their dogs without fear of citations, at porch lights glowing warm and welcoming in, whatever color temperature their owners preferred. "I think," he said slowly, "that there are probably other neighborhoods like this, other HOAs abusing power, other people too afraid to fight back." Carmen Rodriguez, who'd stayed for the barbecue, overheard. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying maybe retirement was premature," Frank said. "Maybe there's still work to do. Different work, but important." "HOA reform advocacy?" Sarah asked. "Investigation and prosecution of abusive HOAs," Frank corrected. "Working with local and federal authorities to identify criminal behavior disguised as community governance." Carmen smiled. "The U.S. Attorney's Office could use a consultant on these cases. Someone with investigative experience and personal understanding of HOA dynamics." "Is that a job offer?" "It's an invitation to keep fighting the good fight. Part-time, as much or as little as you want. But yes, we'd pay you." Frank looked at Sarah. She nodded. "Then I accept." A year later, Frank Falk had helped build cases against 7 abusive HOA boards across Florida. 3 more were under investigation. The pattern was always the same. Small-time tyrants drunk on minor authority, abusing vulnerable people who didn't know how to fight back. But now they had Frank, and word was spreading. HOA presidents across the state were discovering that bylaws didn't grant immunity from the law, that homeowners had rights. That abuse of power, no matter how petty, came with consequences. Frank still lived at 1247 Oleander Court. His lawn was whatever length he deemed appropriate. His trash cans appeared when necessary. His porch light glowed warm and welcoming. And every morning he walked his peaceful neighborhood, nodding to neighbors who lived without fear. The quiet man had found his voice, and tyrants everywhere learned an important lesson. Power without accountability always leads to downfall. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just be marshals in retirement, waiting for one wrong move to remind you that justice never retires. It just gets more patient.